The low hum of the jet engines blended with the clinking of champagne glasses as the first-class cabin settled into its usual rhythm of whispered conversations and gentle comfort. Michael Carter leaned back in his seat, a picture of composure. His custom-tailored suit fit, like it was woven for this very moment. But he wore it lightly, preferring the quiet anonymity that travel sometimes gave him. To most around him, he was just another passenger, albeit one with an aura of authority. What they didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Michael wasn't simply a CEO. He was the CEO, the man behind one of the nation's largest holding companies, a billionaire investor whose influence extended far beyond Wall Street. For him, this flight was routine, just another trip across the country to oversee a merger that would make headlines. Yet for all his power, Michael carried himself without arrogance, greeting staff with a smile, and even helping an elderly passenger stow her bag. When the flight attendant passed by, he asked politely, "Excuse me, could I have my meal when you get chance?" The response was curt, a dismissive flick of her hand as she continued serving others, her expression carefully neutral, but her tone carrying an edge of condescension. Michael thought little of it at first. Perhaps she was busy. But when she returned later with trays for others and passed by again, his calm gaze followed her, noticing how she smiled warmly at passengers seated around him while her demeanor hardened only when addressing him. Whispers began to stir among those nearby, subtle glances exchanged, but Michael simply exhaled slowly, refusing to create a scene. His life had taught him patience and control, but beneath the calm, a storm brewed. He knew discrimination when he saw it. He had lived it, fought against it, and risen above it. Now, sitting in a first-class seat he had rightfully purchased, he could feel the weight of history pressing down again, the quiet sting of being treated as if he did not belong. The irony was almost laughable. Here, he was, the man whose decisions affected thousands of jobs, being denied something as simple as a meal. To the flight attendant, he was just another black man to overlook, another passenger to dismiss, but to the airline itself, he was the very hand that signed their future paychecks. Michael remained silent, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest, his expression unreadable. He had no intention of demanding respect. It was already his by right, by achievement, by every battle he had fought to reach this point. What he intended was something far greater. The cabin remained blissfully unaware that the most powerful man on the plane was about to remind everyone, including the flight crew, that actions have consequences and arrogance, no matter how small, can topple empires. As the minutes ticked by, Michael's silence became its own kind of statement. He sat calmly, his posture upright, hands folded neatly in his lap, eyes following the attendants as they moved back and forth through the aisle. His composure unsettled those around him more than if he had raised his voice. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at him, then at the attendant who continued to avoid his row. One elderly man across the aisle frowned deeply, clearly recognizing what was happening. The attendant, a woman named Lisa, finally returned, tray in hand. She leaned in toward Michael with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, we've run out of the chicken entree. You'll need to wait until the next service." Her words dripped with insincerity, her voice pitched slightly louder, almost as if she wanted others to hear. Michael's gaze never wavered. He didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply inclined his head slightly, his lips curling in the faintest hint of acknowledgement. That silence unnerved Lisa, who shifted on her feet before walking away briskly. Michael turned to the window, watching the endless clouds stretch out like an ocean of white. Inside, however, his mind sharpened with focus. He wasn't angry about the food. It wasn't hunger that pricked at him. It was the principle, the deliberate disrespect, the sneering undertone of someone who thought they could decide who belonged in first class and who did not. Michael had endured worse, but the irony here was too sharp to ignore. His company had an extensive contract with this very airline, one that funneled millions into its coffers annually. He knew every executive on the board personally. He knew which of them would answer his call before the first ring ended. And he knew that when he spoke, entire fleets could be grounded, entire careers could evaporate. All of this, while Lisa strutted about, secure in the illusion that she had gotten away with a small act of superiority. Michael smiled faintly to himself, the type of smile that came not from amusement, but from certainty. Patience had always been his weapon, and in 10 minutes he would use it in a way that no one on this flight, or in the airline itself, would ever forget. It wasn't long before the passengers around him began to whisper more openly. A young couple seated, too, rose up, leaned toward each other, their eyes darting back to Michael. "Why hasn't he been served?" the woman asked under her breath. The man shrugged, unease plain on his face. A businessman in a navy blazer cleared his throat loudly, as if signaling his disapproval, while the elderly man from earlier shook his head in quiet frustration. The tension in the cabin thickened, though Lisa seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind, to it. She continued making her rounds, refilling champagne glasses, checking on passengers who had been served twice already, all the while deliberately bypassing Michael. Every slight movement of hers was calculated, her disdain barely concealed. But what she didn't realize was that Michael was no ordinary target for her casual prejudice. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, he retrieved his phone from his jacket pocket. He scrolled to a familiar number, his thumb hovering over the call button. He paused, not out of hesitation, but out of a sense of timing. Timing, he had learned long ago, was everything. The man in the blazer leaned over discreetly. "Sir, do you want me to call for the purser?" "This is unacceptable," he muttered. Michael gave him a polite nod. "Thank you, but it won't be necessary." His voice was calm, even soothing, yet it carried an authority that made the man sit back instantly. Michael put the phone down again, resting it on his thigh. He wasn't going to resolve this quietly or privately. No, he would allow the flight to play out just long enough for Lisa's arrogance to crystallize into something undeniable. And when he did act, it would not only address this insult, it would shatter the illusion of security that allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. The whispers around him grew louder, passengers now emboldened to question the attendant directly. "Excuse me, why hasn't he been served?" one woman demanded. Lisa's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Michael finally reached for his phone again, this time pressing the button without hesitation. 10 minutes, he thought. That was all it would take. The line connected instantly. "Mr. Carter?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, tinged with nervous energy. Michael's lips curved into a small smile. "Yes, I need you to connect me to the airline's president. Immediately." There was a pause, a stammered reply, and then the line clicked again. Within seconds, a familiar voice filled his ear. "Michael? This is an unexpected surprise. Everything all right?" The passengers closest to him perked up, sensing the weight behind his words, though they couldn't hear the call itself. Michael's voice was steady, but it carried steel. "I'm currently aboard flight 482. I've just been denied service repeatedly by one of your attendants. I want to make this very clear. I am not calling to complain about food. I'm calling because your employee decided I don't belong in the seat I paid for. I want you to understand the gravity of what that means." Silence followed, heavy and charged. Then hurried assurances. "Michael, I will address this immediately. Please don't." Michael cut him off. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you. I'll handle this myself when I land. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare for fallout. Because by the time this plane touches down, the entire crew will no longer be employed by your airline." The words, spoken evenly, hit like thunder. A murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers realized exactly who Michael Carter was. Lisa froze mid-step, her tray trembling slightly in her grip, color draining from her face. Her arrogance evaporated in an instant as whispers turned into open stares. She had mocked and dismissed him like a nobody, only to discover he was a man who could dismantle her career with a single phone call. Michael ended the call without another word, sliding his phone back into his pocket. Then he leaned back in his seat again, calm as ever, while the storm he had unleashed gathered momentum. The change in the cabin was immediate and stark. Passengers who had sat in uncomfortable silence now leaned forward, murmuring to one another about the revelation. A few even applauded quietly, their claps muffled but unmistakable. Lisa, once brimming with false confidence, now looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting from Michael to the passengers who no longer sympathized with her. The purser rushed over, her voice trembling as she said, "Mr. Carter, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Please allow me to personally bring you your meal and drinks." Michael regarded her coolly, then shook his head. "It's too late." His words cut deeper than any outburst could. The purser swallowed hard, realizing the weight of what was unfolding. The rest of the crew shifted, uneasily, no longer smug or aloof but visibly shaken. Lisa tried to open her mouth, perhaps to apologize, but the words died in her throat when she met Michael's steady gaze. He didn't need to raise his voice or issue threats. His silence spoke louder than anything else, the silence of a man who held lives, careers, and reputations in his hands. The rest of the flight passed under a heavy cloud. Every sound, every movement was edged with tension. For Michael, it wasn't about revenge. It was about principle, about showing that disrespect carries consequences no matter how high above the ground you are. When the plane finally touched down, the weight of anticipation pressed on everyone. The captain's usual cheerful landing announcement was brittle, almost strained, as though he too sensed the fate awaiting his crew. As passengers unbuckled their belts, many turned to Michael, offering quiet words of support. Some shook his hand, thanking him for standing up not just for himself, but for every silent slight others had endured. Michael accepted their words graciously, his calm never faltering. Meanwhile, Lisa's hands shook as she gathered trays, her once arrogant demeanor replaced by sheer dread. She knew her career was over. The purser, pale and tight-lipped, avoided Michael's gaze entirely. As the cabin door opened, waiting on the jet bridge were several suited executives summoned by Michael's call midair. Their faces betrayed panic and urgency as they hurried aboard. Michael stood, towering over the stunned crew, and with deliberate steps walked toward the exit. He didn't even spare Lisa a glance. His silence, once again, was louder than anything he could have said. The terminal buzzed with its usual chaos, but within the airline's executive offices, chaos of a different kind erupted. News had already spread. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar holding company had been humiliated aboard one of their premier flights. Michael sat calmly in a private lounge, sipping a glass of water as executives scrambled before him. "Mr. Carter, please, we'll do whatever it takes." One pleaded, his voice strained with desperation. Michael's response was measured, but final. "You'll do nothing for me. What you will do is take responsibility. This isn't about me, it's about the culture you allow. Fix it or watch everything you've built collapse." His tone left no room for argument. Within hours, the entire crew of Flight 482 was terminated, and the airline scrambled to issue public statements, apologies, and promises of reform. Yet, for Michael, the matter was already behind him. He hadn't sought headlines or apologies, he had sought justice, and he had delivered it in the quiet, devastating way only true power allows. As he left the airport that day, the world outside continued as if nothing had happened. But for the airline, for Lisa, and for everyone who had witnessed that flight, the lesson was permanent. Respect was not optional, and arrogance, no matter how small, could bring down giants in a matter of minutes.